It happened 2 Fridays ago. An evening that delivered the first heavy blow, one I still feel reverberating through me. I had just come home after a draining day at work, the kind where someone else's mistake keeps you stuck at the office hours longer than planned. I stepped inside, expecting the usual scene, the comforting blend of chaos and routine. But instead, I was met with an eerie stillness, a silence that clung to me like soaked fabric. Jessica wasn't in the kitchen, which was unusual. That's typically where she winds down, either experimenting with a new recipe or at least preparing something simple for the kids. But that night, the kitchen was abandoned. A bottle of wine sat opened on the counter, and beside it, 2 glasses. One held the smudge of fresh lipstick. The other remained nearly full, untouched, as though it had been waiting for someone who never arrived, or perhaps someone who had already gone. I moved through the house, calling out her name. I found her in the living room, curled up on the couch with her feet tucked beneath her. What struck me instantly was her outfit. A sleek black dress she usually reserved for romantic nights out. It wasn't something one would wear to simply lounge at home on a quiet Friday. And then there was her expression. She was laughing softly, speaking in low tones into her phone, a bright smile curving her lips in a way that made my chest tighten. When she noticed me, her smile faltered for the briefest moment before she quickly masked it. "Oh, hey babe," she said, waving me off casually as if I were little more than a background detail. "Just catching up with an old friend." I didn't ask who. I refused to be that husband, the one who swallows every convenient story handed to him. I just watched her, studied the way her eyes didn't meet mine. There was something unspoken, a tension laced beneath her nonchalant tone, like a wire pulled taut and ready to snap. Whatever was going on, it wasn't small. But I turned away. I wasn't ready to confront her without understanding the full picture. I needed answers first. The following morning, Jessica told me she had to go into the office. It was a Saturday. That was the first time doubt stabbed through me like a hornet's sting. She'd never worked weekends before, and her outfit wasn't businesslike. She wore a short floral dress, the one she knew I adored, along with high heels. Before leaving, she kissed me on the cheek. But it didn't feel real. It felt like a placeholder, a hollow gesture meant to keep suspicions at bay. Once she was gone, I got the kids settled in front of the TV with cartoons and told them I had a quick errand. Then, I slipped out to follow her, careful to stay far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. My pulse thundered as I trailed her car, each red light feeling like a countdown to a truth I wasn't ready to face. Instead of driving downtown to her workplace, she veered across town and pulled into a small coffee shop we'd never visited together. My gut twisted when she stepped out of the car. She wasn't alone. A man in a leather jacket stood waiting. I watched as she approached him confidently and, without pause, wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. It wasn't casual. It wasn't friendly. It was long, personal, and unmistakably intimate. The kind of kiss that hollows you out from the inside when you realize it's meant for someone who isn't you. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I couldn't fully process what I was seeing. My wife, right there, with someone else, looking genuinely joyful in a way I hadn't seen in months. I knew I couldn't confront her then and there. Not like that. I needed evidence, something undeniable. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, my heart thudding so loudly I thought I might faint. I watched them enter the cafe together, my vision narrowing as fury clouded everything else. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was deliberate, and I had a feeling it wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time I had seen it. I spent the rest of that Saturday lost in thought, aimlessly driving around before heading home. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car, staring at our house. The sounds of our kids' laughter floated out through a cracked window, reminding me that everything was about to change forever. Jessica didn't return until later in the afternoon. She walked in like it had been any ordinary day, carrying a grocery bag and flashing a casual smile. "Hey, sorry I took so long. The lines were insane," she said, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter. She didn't look at me and I didn't push her. Even though my insides were on fire, I held it all in. My anger churned quietly beneath the surface. Waiting. I wasn't going to explode, not yet. If I wanted the truth, I had to be smart about it. So that night, while she was upstairs tucking the kids into bed, I picked up her phone. She had left her phone on the kitchen counter, completely unlocked, as if she didn't have a single worry in the world. I picked it up with trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I felt like I was invading her privacy, like I was doing something terribly wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. Inside her messages, there was a thread from Tom, the same man I had spotted her with earlier. I began scrolling through the conversation, and each line pulled me deeper into a reality I wasn't ready to face. Their chat was filled with warmth, flirtation, and the kind of closeness that made my stomach twist. She talked about how much she missed him, about how thrilled she was for their upcoming trip together. Every message was a reminder of the double life she had been living. My hands trembled as I read through them. There were affectionate phrases, private jokes, all signs of a relationship that had no place in our lives. Then I saw it, a conversation about a hotel near the highway. She told him she'd be spending the weekend there, pretending to me that it was for a work retreat. I felt like the walls were closing in. Every word she had typed was like a dagger. The truth was unavoidable now. She had been dishonest with me for months. Every supposed work trip, every girls' night she mentioned had been nothing more than a cover for meeting him. I opened her photo gallery next. There they were, captured in a series of images that tore at me. He had his arm around her, and her head rested comfortably on his shoulder. In one particular picture, she wore the exact same dress she had worn to celebrate our last anniversary. The irony was cruel, our special memories reused for someone else. It felt like she had taken everything we built and handed it over to another man, dressing it in my memories. Suddenly, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I quickly locked the screen and placed the phone back in the same spot. Leaning against the counter, I tried to compose myself, attempting to look casual though my pulse was racing. She entered the kitchen, smiling at me like she always had, completely unaware. That familiar smile, so easy, so effortless, only deepened the storm inside me. I forced myself to smile back, slipping into the role of the oblivious husband one more time. The following day, I set my plan in motion. I told Jessica an old college friend was visiting and that I'd be meeting him for dinner. She appeared almost pleased, like she was relieved to have the night free. "Take your time, have fun," she said, giving me a kiss that left a bitter taste. But I didn't go meet anyone. Instead, I drove back to the coffee shop where I had seen them together before. I parked across the street and waited, a sinking feeling anchoring me to my seat. I knew she'd return to him. Something inside me just knew. Sure enough, around 6 in the evening, I saw her car arrive. She wasn't alone this time, Tom was with her. He slipped his arm around her waist as they laughed, completely at ease with one another. It was clear this wasn't some fleeting affair, this was a routine, a second life she had built alongside mine. I followed them as they left the cafe and got into Tom's car. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, my thoughts spiraling between rage and heartbreak. They eventually pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel with neon lights that flickered in the early evening. A place that didn't pretend to be anything more than what it was. I watched as she walked inside with him, completely at peace, like they belonged together. I stayed parked there, staring at the motel's dim glow. In that moment, I knew that I had to confront her. But I didn't want yelling or accusations. I needed her to face me, to see what she had done, and say it aloud. No more pretending. No more lies. I needed her to acknowledge the pain she had caused, to understand that this one decision, this betrayal, had destroyed everything we had created together. That night, driving home, I felt strangely calm. There was no more guessing, no more wondering. Jessica had already made her choice, it was just up to me to decide what came next. When Sunday arrived, everything felt foreign. The house no longer felt like home. It was like I was visiting someone else's life. I watched from the doorway as our kids played on the swings outside, their laughter echoing through the yard. Meanwhile, Jessica moved around the kitchen, humming softly and flipping pancakes as though nothing had changed. The warm smell of syrup and fresh coffee filled the air, mocking the chaos inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about the photos I had taken, about her in his arms. She turned and greeted me with a bright smile. "Morning, sleepyhead. You were out late last night. How was your friend?" The way she asked it with such innocence made me want to laugh at the absurdity. I tightened my grip on the counter to hold my emotions in check and responded with a quiet, "It was fine," avoiding her gaze. Her ability to lie so smoothly amazed me. I realized I couldn't keep living this performance. I was just an actor now, playing a role in a drama I never asked to be part of, and my final act was drawing near. That evening, while the kids were caught up in their cartoons, I found Jessica upstairs, folding laundry on the bed. When she looked up and noticed my expression, something flickered in her eyes, a crack in that perfectly rehearsed mask. Maybe it was worry. Maybe guilt. But I saw it. "Jessica," I said, keeping my tone even, though I was boiling inside. "We need to talk." She froze mid-motion, her hands resting on a neatly stacked pile of folded shirts, but her face remained composed, offering me a wide-eyed, almost innocent glance, her head tilted just slightly. "Sure, what's going on?" she asked as though nothing was wrong. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the photo gallery. There they were, images of her and Tom. I handed the phone to her silently. I watched the transformation in her expression. The color drained from her face, her eyes grew wide with disbelief as they scanned the screen. She blinked once, then again, her mouth opening slightly before shutting again, like she couldn't find the right words. The silence between us stretched into something heavy, undeniable. In that moment, all my worst suspicions were confirmed. Her remorse was written in the slump of her shoulders and the panicked way she looked back at me. "Adam, I can explain," she finally said, her voice unsteady. She reached out toward the phone like she could somehow erase the evidence from existence. I took a step back, staying just beyond her reach. "Explain what exactly, Jessica?" I asked, my voice cold. "Are you going to tell me how you've been secretly involved with someone else for months? Or is it about all those fabricated girls' nights and so-called work trips? They were all just ways to see him, weren't they?" My voice grew louder, despite my efforts to control it, the weight of years of disappointment and heartache breaking free. She stared back at me, her features hardening, and the guilt I'd seen just moments ago quickly shifted into irritation, as if I had somehow created this disaster. "This isn't how I meant for it to turn out," she snapped, her tone sharp now, abandoning the mask of innocence. "Tom gets me in ways you never have, Adam. Things between us haven't been okay for a long time, and you know that." And just like that, the blame shifted. She was trying to make it seem like I had driven her to it, as though her actions were reasonable given the circumstances of our struggling marriage. My hands curled into fists, not out of a desire to lash out, but to physically restrain myself, to keep grounded. "You're really going to say this is my fault?" I asked, my voice shaking with held-back emotion. "If something wasn't right between us, you could have talked to me. We could have worked through it together. But instead, you chose deception. You chose to keep secrets, to throw away everything we had built together. You chose him." Her eyes narrowed, her face shifting into something distant and unfamiliar. "Maybe I did," she said, voice quiet but sharp. "Maybe I picked him because I got tired of just existing here. I feel invisible around you. You don't see me anymore. You're always preoccupied with work, with everything else. Tom, he makes me feel alive again." Each word hit like a blow, sharp and deliberate. Sure, I'd been caught up with work and the chaos of daily life, and yes, perhaps I had started to take some things for granted. But none of that excused what she had done. Nothing could. She looked at me with a stare that dared me to argue, as if she was stripping away the final image of the person I thought I had known. "So that's really it then?" I asked, my voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. "You've already decided?" She didn't respond with words, but the expression in her eyes was answer enough. I turned away and walked out of the room, my heart pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. A surge of fury and grief clashed within me, colliding like thunderclouds before a storm. Outside, our children were playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out, oblivious to the emotional collapse unraveling behind closed doors. I stood there for a while, watching them, and it struck me everything had to change. I couldn't continue living in a house built on broken promises. I couldn't stay with someone who looked straight at me and made me out to be the reason for her betrayal. A single decision, one act of betrayal, had shattered everything. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling, my mind spiraling through thoughts of how I would tell the kids, how I would explain that Mommy and Daddy were no longer going to be under the same roof. My world had cracked wide open, and all I could do now was try to salvage the parts that mattered. My children, my sanity, and whatever pieces of a future I could gather from the ruins. When Monday morning came, it felt like a distorted echo of the life I once knew. I was still in the same home, surrounded by familiar walls, but they now seemed to be pressing in on me. The kids sat at the table, chatting about their school day, completely unaware of the emotional battlefield between their parents. Jessica moved through the kitchen on autopilot, pouring cereal, saying a few light-hearted words, her eyes never once meeting mine. But my mind was already made up. I couldn't let this illusion go on. Not for my mental well-being, and especially not for our kids. After dropping them off at school, I chose to take the day off. It was time for an honest conversation, one without the mask of family life or empty routines. Jessica didn't expect me back so early. She was lounging in the living room, scrolling on her phone with her feet tucked under her, exactly like the first time I caught her messaging Tom. I paused in the doorway, just watching her for a second. When she finally looked up and noticed me, there was a flicker of something in her gaze. Maybe surprise, maybe irritation at the interruption of her peaceful morning. "We need to figure out what's next," I said, my voice calm even though adrenaline pulsed through me. Jessica's face turned rigid as she lowered her phone onto the table with a frustrated sigh, as though dealing with me was just another unwelcome chore. "Adam, can we not do this right now?" she said, reclining slightly and folding her arms across her chest. "The kids, Jess." I stepped closer, cutting her off. "No, we need to have this conversation. You owe me that much. They deserve clarity, and I need to know where we go from here." She looked at me for a long pause, her expression unreadable, before dramatically rolling her eyes. "All right, Adam, what is it you want to hear? That I'm sorry? That I regret falling out of love with you?" Her words were laced with bitterness, each one landing like a blow. "You think this is just about saying sorry?" I let out a short, cold laugh. "This isn't something an apology can fix, Jess. This is about the choices you kept making. Lying to me, deceiving our kids, because it was easier than facing the truth. You're the one who decided what we had wasn't worth the effort." Her jaw tightened as she gave a subtle shake of her head. "Do you really believe this was easy for me? That I wanted things to fall apart? I spent years trying to reach you, trying to get you to see me, to pull you out of that work shell you live in. I tried everything." That old, familiar rage started building again, fierce and uncontainable. "Don't shift the blame onto me," I said, my voice rising. "I know I wasn't perfect. I got caught up in work, sure. But I was always here, Jess. I never walked away from our family. I never gave up on you." My hand trembled slightly as I pointed toward her. "But you turned your back on everything we built. You broke every promise you ever made." For a moment, silence enveloped us, thick and suffocating. Then she abruptly stood, her expression hardening into something cruel. "You know what, Adam? Maybe I am done. Maybe I'm tired of being the only one who holds everything together while you coast through life pretending it's all okay. Tom listens. Tom sees me. He actually cares." "Tom," I repeated, her words twisting inside me. "The guy who meets you in dim motel rooms? The one sneaking around behind his wife's back? That's the man you're throwing this family away for? You call that love? That's not love, Jess. It's deception. Just like everything you've been doing." For a brief second, I caught something in her eyes, hesitation maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Turning her back to me, she spoke in a low voice. "You don't get it. It's more complicated than you think." "No, Jess," I replied as I took a step forward, my voice steady and calm. "It's not complicated. It's very clear. You broke us. You shattered what we had. And now I need you to be honest with me. What is it that you want? Do you plan to keep pretending in front of our kids, lying to them, playing house like nothing's wrong? Or are you finally ready to take responsibility for your actions?" She turned around slowly, her eyes narrowed and her voice like ice. "You think I'll just walk away from all of this? From my kids, my home? You think I'll let you take over while I disappear? This house is mine too, Adam. I'm not going anywhere." That's when the truth hit me with full force. She didn't feel guilty. She wasn't trying to fix anything. To her, this was a contest of wills, a battle over control of the remnants of what once was our life. She wasn't going to admit any fault. She wasn't interested in healing. She was prepared to fight me for every fragment of the marriage she had already destroyed. In that moment, an eerie calm settled over me. I finally saw the truth. Jessica was no longer the person I had once loved. She looked the same, but the warmth, the kindness that had once defined her gone. A stranger now stood before me. Slowly, I nodded, as a heavy decision took root in my chest. "All right," I said quietly, barely above a whisper. If that's how you want it, then fine. But I'm done pretending. Not for you, not for anyone. This is over, Jess. I'll call a lawyer tomorrow. You can stay here, but I'm taking the kids. They need someone who genuinely puts them first, not someone hiding out in motels with Tom. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. You can't just take them, Adam. I stared back at her, my expression firm. Watch me. I walked out, my hands shaking, but my mind clear. It was the toughest decision I'd ever faced, but I knew it was the right one. For the children and for myself. I had given everything to try and understand, to navigate through the lies. But Jessica had reduced it all to rubble, leaving nothing but pain in her wake. I had wasted too much time holding on to the hope that we could somehow make things right. But now I saw it plainly. The woman I had once cherished no longer existed. She had become someone who treated our shared life like it was disposable. That night I found myself in a small, cheap hotel. The walls were so thin I could hear every sound from the room next door. Raised voices arguing, bursts of laughter, something heavy crashing to the ground. Outside, the world moved forward as though nothing had shifted, while inside, mine had completely fallen apart. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the conversation with Jessica again and again, searching for any trace, any sign that something might still be salvageable. But deep down, I knew there was nothing left to hold on to. The following morning, I sought out a lawyer. Sitting across from someone in that position was something I had never pictured for myself. I found myself explaining the situation, my wife's betrayal and what steps I intended to take. The lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, remained composed and matter-of-fact. Clearly, he had handled cases like this many times before. He outlined my legal options, discussed potential custody arrangements, talked through how the property would be divided, and explained the process step by step. The way he dissected my life into organized pieces felt cold and impersonal. I nodded quietly as I signed the documents, feeling oddly disconnected from the entire experience, as if I were merely watching someone else go through it. That afternoon, I returned home, unsure what to expect but prepared to face whatever was coming. I wasn't certain Jessica would even be there. A part of me almost preferred if she wasn't. Maybe she'd gone off with Tom, escaping the chaos she had caused. But when I stepped inside, there she was, once again in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with her back to me. For a moment, I simply stood there, silently observing her. The scene appeared so ordinary, so familiar. It stirred a sharp wave of anger within me. "We need to talk," I said, my tone harder than I intended. She jerked slightly, turning to look at me. It was clear she'd been waiting for this moment. Her expression was firm, her eyes narrowed in resistance. "Do we really have to do this now, Adam?" she asked, her voice heavy and tinged with fatigue. I drew in a deep breath and stepped forward. "Yes, we do. I met with a lawyer today. I'm moving forward with a divorce." Her hands froze mid-motion, and the knife clattered onto the cutting board. Her face turned pale, though I caught a flicker of defiance beneath the initial shock. "You can't just make that decision without me," she said. "We need to discuss this, especially what it means for the kids." I shook my head slowly. "I've already thought it through. I'm not going to keep living in this house while you continue your affair and pretend like everything's fine. You made your choice, Jessica. Now I'm making mine." She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her gaze dropped to the counter, her fingers curling tightly into fists. "So that's it?" she said eventually, her voice unsteady. "You're really just going to walk away? Just like that?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "You walked away from us first, the moment you chose to be with Tom. I've tried, Jessica. I really tried to make sense of all this. But you've made it clear I don't matter to you anymore. All that's left now is figuring out what happens from here." She stared at me, her eyes burning with fury. "And what exactly do you think happens next, Adam? You plan on taking the children and leaving me here with nothing? You believe I'll just let that happen?" I stepped in closer, my hands trembling, not with fear, but with conviction. "I'm not taking them from you, but I am taking them with me. We'll sort out custody, but I can't allow them to stay in a home built on lies. If you want to challenge me on this, then do it. But understand, I'll fight with everything I have to protect them from this environment you've created. I expected her to explode, to scream, to lash out, but instead, her shoulders slumped. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in weeks. There it was, real fear, raw and unguarded. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. You think you're flawless in all this, don't you? She said, her voice catching. You think none of this is your fault. But you pushed me away, Adam. Long before Tom came into the picture, you stopped caring. Her words struck hard, and I swallowed, feeling the weight of them. Perhaps there was some truth. Maybe I had drifted, buried myself in work, in everything except her. But that still didn't excuse what she had done. Instead of working to repair what was broken, she chose to tear it all down. I was far from perfect, I admitted, barely above a whisper. But I never turned my back on you. I never lied or tore our family apart because I was unhappy. You did that, Jessica. You and only you. She looked stunned, her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. I could see the protective shell she'd built around herself beginning to fracture. She hadn't expected this. Maybe she thought I'd beg, try to win her back, but I was done. I had seen enough. I turned away and started up the stairs. I'll be sleeping in the guest room for now. I'll let you know when I plan to leave. We'll talk to the kids together once we've made some decisions. Behind me, I heard her let out a sob, a single, strangled sound that echoed through the silence of the house. But I didn't look back. I couldn't allow myself to be drawn into her grief anymore. I had my own pain to face, my own healing to begin. And above all, I had to stay strong for our children. Jessica's tears were no longer mine to carry. As I ascended the staircase, a strange wave of relief washed over me, as if a massive burden had finally slipped off my shoulders. Although the most challenging part still lay ahead, breaking the news to our children and unraveling the life we had built together, I also felt an unexpected sense of empowerment. Jessica had destroyed everything we once shared, but I was determined to salvage what remained and start fresh. There was no turning back now. And while that realization stung deeply, it also felt strangely necessary. The truth had surfaced, the illusions had crumbled, and there was no longer room for pretense. The life I thought I knew had vanished. Yet, for the first time in many weeks, I could glimpse a path forward, a way to mend, to rebuild, to begin again. The most daunting task was preparing to talk to the kids. I spent the following days trying to find the right words, practicing my lines in front of the mirror. Every attempt left me choking, the phrases lodged in my throat. How could I possibly explain to two young children that everything they knew was about to shift forever? How do you deliver such a blow to their sense of safety while trying to preserve any sense of love and security still left between us? Jessica and I barely communicated during those days. We drifted through the house like shadows, avoiding each other but painfully aware of the moment that was approaching. She understood what was coming, and in her own silent way, I believed she feared it just as much as I did. We had agreed that Saturday morning would be the time. We'd break the news over breakfast, allowing the entire day to help our children process the fallout. I sensed she wished to delay it, but I stood firm, prolonging the inevitable would only make things worse. Saturday morning arrived, and I felt like a man walking toward his own execution. The children were already seated at the breakfast table, their little faces brightening when they saw me enter. My daughter, Emma, beamed with excitement. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed. "I made a picture of us at the zoo." She held up a drawing in crayon, showing all four of us standing together in front of a lion's enclosure, our faces lit up with happiness. My heart ached just looking at it. That cheerful version of our family was on the verge of disappearing forever. I knelt beside her, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's such a lovely picture, Emma," I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Can you sit down for a moment, sweetheart? Mommy and I need to talk to you and your brother." Jessica took a seat across from me, her eyes swollen from countless sleepless nights. She tried to smile at the kids, but the effort came off as more of a grimace. I inhaled deeply, fighting to keep the emotions at bay. "Emma, Jason," I started, my voice cracking as I struggled to speak, cleared my throat and tried again. "Mommy and Daddy need to talk to you about something really important." Emma's smile faded. Her eyebrows creased with worry. Jason, who was only 7, glanced between the two of us, clearly picking up on the tension in the room. I wished more than anything I could shield them from this moment, to let them remain blissfully unaware. But that was no longer possible. "Your mom and I glanced over at Jessica, who was staring down at her hands. "We both love you more than anything. But sometimes, even when grown-ups love their kids very much, they can't always stay living in the same house." Emma's eyes widened. and her face twisted in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked in a shaky voice. "Are you going away, Daddy?" Those words struck like a dagger. I reached out, gently holding her small hand in mine. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going away from you. Never. I'll always be your daddy, and I'll always be there for you and Jason. But Mommy and I won't be living in the same house anymore." Jason appeared puzzled, his gaze moving from me to Jessica. "But are we still going to be a family?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jessica finally lifted her eyes, tears glistening as she reached over to touch his shoulder. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We will always be a family. That won't ever change. We love you so much, and nothing can take that away." Emma's face crumbled as tears streamed down her cheeks. The sound of her crying tore at me. I gathered her into my arms, holding her close, whispering again and again that I loved her and that things were going to be okay. But I knew that wasn't entirely true. Things weren't okay. They were different now. They were painful, and there was no simple way to make it better. Jessica leaned toward Jason, trying to comfort him, but he pulled back. His face tightened with frustration. "Why?" he yelled, his voice rising. "Why can't you just stay together? Why does everything have to change?" Jessica's tears spilled over as she reached for him again. But he jumped out of his seat, shoving his chair back with a screech and bolting toward his bedroom. The door slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing through the house like a final exclamation point on a moment I had dreaded for so long. I held Emma close as her sobs faded into soft sniffles, her tiny frame sinking into mine. I pressed a kiss to her hair, murmuring over and over that I loved her, that we would get through this. Across the table, Jessica sat motionless, her face buried in her hands, her body trembling with quiet sobs. When Emma had finally stopped crying, I guided her gently into the living room and turned on her favorite cartoons to comfort her. I reassured her that I'd return shortly, then stepped quietly back into the kitchen. Jessica was still there, seated at the table, her sobs now silent. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes were swollen and red from crying. As I entered, she glanced up, and for a few heavy seconds, we just looked at each other, the silence thick with everything that had passed between us. "Do you think this has been easy for me?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you really think I wanted to hurt them this way?" I gently shook my head, emotions tightening my throat. My own tears were close to falling. "No, Jess," I replied quietly. "I don't think this has been easy for you. But the truth is, this is the outcome of a decision you made. There were consequences, and now we're living through them. It's painful for all of us, especially for the kids. And right now, we need to focus on doing what's best for them." She turned her gaze away, eyes glazing over as she nodded faintly. "I know," she admitted softly. "I know I messed up, but I love them, Adam. I love them more than anything." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a slight shift inside me, a flicker of compassion for the pain she was carrying. Despite the betrayal, she was still their mother. She still loved them deeply. We both did. And somehow, amid all the heartache and broken trust, we had to figure out a way to move forward for their sake. "Then that's what we need to focus on," I said with a steadier voice. "We put them first. Always." She lifted her eyes to meet mine, and there was something in her expression I hadn't seen in a long while. Remorse, maybe a glimpse of the person I used to love. She gave a small nod, her lips pressing tightly together. "Okay," she whispered. "For them." Leaving her there, I returned to the living room and sat down beside Emma, draping an arm around her. She leaned against me, eyes locked on the television, and in that moment, I knew with certainty I would fight to keep these small moments alive. I would fight for my children's joy, their sense of security. The marriage may have ended, but I could still be the father they needed. And that alone was something worth holding on to. The following days unfolded like a strange blend of routine and chaos. I slept in the guest room, my clothes packed haphazardly into a suitcase placed at the foot of the bed. Jessica and I moved through the house like strangers, orbiting one another in a space that no longer felt like our own. The kids were confused, asking each night if things could return to how they once were. Every time, I struggled to find the right words. The sorrow in their eyes was the most unbearable part, and I had to keep reminding myself, even if I was still furious with Jessica, the kids needed both of us. One afternoon after Jessica had gone out, I decided it was time. I began packing my things. I called my friend Mark, who had generously offered me a spare room until I found a place of my own. He arrived with his truck, helping me carry boxes without asking for details. He knew enough of the situation to understand, and his quiet support spoke volumes, exactly the kind of help only a true friend can offer. It was a surreal experience, packing up pieces of my life, one box at a time, and stacking them into the back of his truck. With each trip, it felt like I was packing away pieces of myself, memories, dreams, and a future that had vanished. Emma and Jason were still at school, and I was grateful. They wouldn't have to see me leave, wouldn't have to witness me stepping out of the house, even if it was only temporary. When the last box was loaded, I paused in the now-empty guest room, staring at the stripped mattress and bare dresser. It had felt like a prison at times, but leaving it behind still brought a hollow ache. This was real now. As I descended the stairs, Jessica stepped inside. She must have noticed the truck outside because her face drained of color the moment our eyes met. She glanced at the boxes in my hands, then back at me, her mouth parting like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. I set the boxes near the door, exhaling slowly before turning to her. "I'm heading out today," I said, keeping my voice flat. She nodded, tears quickly welling in her eyes. I didn't realize it would be this soon," she said softly. "It's time," I responded. My tone was detached, the anger that had once surged inside me now faded. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just exhausted, ready to move on from this painful chapter. "I'm planning to take the kids this weekend. I'll pick them up after school. We can figure out the rest of the schedule later. But right now, we all need space." She took a small step forward, her voice cracking. "Adam, I know I can't undo what I did. I know I hurt you and destroyed what we had, but please believe me when I say I'm sorry. I never wanted it to end like this." I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel rage. The pain was still there, still raw, but the fury had drained out of me, leaving only a quiet emptiness. I let out a long breath and slowly shook my head. "Jess, I believe that you're truly sorry," I said gently, "but that doesn't erase what's already happened. You made your decisions, and now I have to make mine." Her tears began to fall freely, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Her voice trembled as she asked, "What about the kids?" "I don't want them to hate me, Adam. I don't want to lose them." I had to force down the lump rising in my throat before I could speak. "They won't hate you, Jess. They're hurting, they're confused, but their love for you hasn't gone anywhere. You're their mom. That bond isn't something that just disappears. Just show up for them. Be truthful moving forward. That's all any of us can do now." She gave a faint nod and finally wiped her eyes. A thick silence settled between us, heavy with all the unspoken pain and everything we had lost. I didn't say another word. Instead, I picked up the boxes and carried them to the truck outside. Mark was already there, leaning against the side of the vehicle with a neutral look on his face. He offered a small nod, his way of showing quiet support. I climbed into the passenger seat and closed the door firmly. As the truck began to move, I looked back at the house, my home once. Jessica stood in the doorway, growing smaller and smaller in the side mirror until she disappeared from view entirely. The drive to Mark's place was quiet. He didn't speak, and neither did I. Mark had a gift for knowing when to fill the silence and when to let it be, and for that, I was thankful. When we arrived, we took the boxes into the small spare room he had cleared out for me. It was simple, just a bed and a dresser, but it was enough. It was a fresh start, even if it didn't look like much. That night, I sat at the edge of the bed, my eyes fixed on the floor while silence pressed in around me. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old photos of Emma and Jason. Birthday celebrations, family trips, silly grins, they were all there. My heart ached with longing. I made myself a quiet promise, no matter what it took, I would give them the stability they deserved, even if I had to do it alone. I sent a short message to Jessica. "I'll pick the kids up at 3 on Friday. Let me know if they need anything for the weekend." Her reply was quick. "Okay. Thank you, Adam." I stared at the screen for a while, then set the phone down. There was no use clinging to what was already gone. My attention had to shift to what remained, my children, my life, and the possibility of a new future. It felt odd, that strange combination of sorrow and freedom. I was no longer trapped by deception or betrayal, yet I was also left adrift, forced to chart a new course I never anticipated. I had no idea what the future held, and that uncertainty was terrifying. Still, in that small room, surrounded by a few boxes and the faint hum of passing cars, something stirred inside me. It was just a small glimmer of hope, but even that tiny flicker was enough. It reminded me that I still had a reason to keep going, a reason to rebuild from the pieces left behind. Lying back on the bed, I stared at the ceiling. My thoughts drifted to Emma and Jason, their laughter, their bright eyes, the way they made every moment feel alive. I knew the journey ahead would be anything but easy. There would be uncomfortable conversations, moments of pain, and challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But I also knew I wouldn't face it alone. I had my kids. And I had people like Mark who were willing to support me through the tough parts. For now, that was enough. Friday came sooner than expected. I spent the entire week at Mark's place, trying to adjust to my new reality. The mornings felt strangely quiet without the usual noise, no Emma chattering away or Jason insisting on wearing his favorite shirt for the third day in a row. Instead, there was silence, too much of it filled with thoughts and memories that refused to let go. Mark did his best to be supportive, but even he knew this was a path I had to walk on my own. No one could do it for me. The hours dragged until it was finally time to pick up the kids. As I drove back to the house, the one that once held so many memories, I felt both excitement and dread. I had missed them more than I could say, even though it had only been a few days. But I also knew seeing Jessica again would be another reminder of everything that had changed. When I arrived, Jason was already outside with his backpack slung over one shoulder. Emma stood on the porch beside Jessica. The sight of them together, my kids next to the woman who used to be my partner, hit me hard. It was a vivid contrast between what had been and what was now. "Daddy!" Emma's voice rang out as she ran toward me, her face glowing with joy. I dropped to one knee and scooped her into my arms, holding her tightly. Jason approached more slowly, his face reflecting a mix of joy and uncertainty. I hugged him too, pulling both of them close, their warmth easing the ache inside me. Jessica remained on the porch, arms crossed and a faint, bittersweet smile on her face. She stood quietly, watching as I embraced the kids, and for a fleeting second, our eyes locked. There was a brief flicker in her expression, perhaps a trace of regret, or maybe a sorrow that mirrored the one I carried. Stepping forward, her tone was gentle as she spoke, mentioning that everything was packed and reminding me that Jason had a soccer match the next morning, needing to be at the field by 9. I gave a small nod in return. "Of course, we'll be there." She lingered a moment before placing a soft hand on Emma's shoulder. "You two be good for Daddy, okay? I'll see you on Sunday." Emma gave a slight nod, her bottom lip quivering just a bit, while Jason looked down, nudging the dirt with his shoe. Their expressions betrayed a deep hurt and lingering confusion, a weight they bore because of the choices we had made. It ached within me, the guilt sharp and heavy. Jessica shot me a quick glance before turning back toward the house, disappearing behind the door as it closed gently. I stood there in silence, clutching my children a little tighter, staring at the door that now separated our lives. For a moment, I just stood still, then shook off the heaviness and focused on what truly mattered, my kids. "Okay, you too. Who's ready for an awesome weekend?" I asked, my voice intentionally brightened with cheer. Emma's face lifted with a small smile, her eyes sparkling just a bit, and Jason responded with a nod, a faint grin forming. We headed off to Mark's place, and I kept the conversation light, asking about their school week and chatting about their friends. Slowly, I could feel them settling into the comfort of our familiar back and forth, and a sliver of the burden on my heart began to ease. Maybe I could still be the dad they needed. Maybe, in spite of everything, I could still be enough. That evening, we made homemade pizza in Mark's kitchen. Emma was adamant about arranging the pepperoni into a smiley face, while Jason meticulously lined up mushrooms like he was crafting a work of art. Mark joined in, cracking jokes and playing around with the kids until their laughter echoed through the room. The tension melted away, replaced by the kind of happiness I hadn't seen on their faces in what felt like a long time. Later that night, the kids were tucked in, Emma curled up on the spare bed and Jason nestled into a sleeping bag beside her. I stepped outside with Mark, a beer in hand, and sat on the porch, gazing down the quiet street. The crisp air felt refreshing. For once, I allowed myself a moment of calm. "You're doing all right, man," Mark said, his voice cutting through the silence. He took a slow sip, his eyes fixed on me. "Seriously, the kids are going to be fine. You're giving them what they need." I gave a slow nod, blinking back the sting behind my eyes. "I really hope so. I just never wanted this for them, never wanted them caught between two homes, forced to pick sides." Mark leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "No one does, Adam. But what matters is that you're showing up. You're making sure they know they're loved. That's what sticks. That's what they'll remember." Looking down, I twisted the bottle in my hand. I still feel so much resentment toward her. It's not constant, but it lingers, the betrayal, the deception. I honestly don't know if I can forgive her. Mark was quiet for a beat, then gave a slow nod. "You don't have to forgive her, not now, maybe not ever. But you do need to find a way to let go for your own sake. Holding on to that anger? It's only going to keep eating away at you. I knew he was right. The anger had once fueled me, giving me something to hold onto, but now it was only leaving burn marks on my soul, marks I didn't want my children to witness. I took a long breath, exhaling slowly, trying to let go of just a bit of the fire I had carried inside for so long. The rest of the weekend passed quickly, marked by moments that felt both ordinary and precious. Jason scored a goal during his soccer game and ran over to me, glowing with pride. Emma asked me to read her favorite bedtime story, her tiny hand resting gently on my arm as she drifted into sleep. These were the fragments I clung to, the real, meaningful pieces of our life together. When Sunday arrived, I drove them back home. Jessica was already waiting on the porch, her face lighting up the moment she saw them. The kids raced toward her, their voices full of excitement as they recounted everything we'd done. I stood a few steps back, watching the reunion, letting them have their moment. Then she looked up at me, our eyes meeting once more, and this time I could see a quiet gratitude in her expression. She mouthed a soft thank you and I nodded in return, just a small, reluctant gesture of understanding. We weren't friends and maybe we never would be again. But we were partners in this new chapter, and that had to be enough. For Emma and Jason's sake, we had to make it work. As I pulled away, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror, a quiet calm settled over me. This wasn't the future I had imagined. It wasn't the life I had planned. But it was something. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would be enough. I turned on the radio, letting the music fill the car, and for the first time in weeks, a smile found its way to my face. It wasn't a broad grin filled with unfiltered happiness, but rather a faint smile, a subtle glimmer of hope. The journey before me was still long, and I was well aware that it wouldn't come without its challenges. There would be obstacles to overcome, emotional hurdles, and days when the weight of loss might seem overwhelming. Yet, alongside those difficult moments, there would also be fresh starts, meaningful new memories, and the opportunity to create a new chapter with my children. And in that moment, it became clear to me that was more valuable than anything else.